Hi, Michael.
Hi.
Today's question says, a student tells us that his desire to satisfy his desires for substances and sex are greater than his desire not to do so. He tells us that he already knows that the best way to purify the mind is to attend to ourselves alone without any phenomena, but he is still not determined enough to do so, even minimally. What other recommendations would Bhagavan give in order to develop a greater determination than that of attending to oneself alone?
Firstly, Bhagavan didn't actually, of his own accord, recommend anything other than self-investigation and self-surrender. If people came to him and said, Bhagavan, will it be helpful if I do japa? Or will it be helpful if I do puja? He'll say, yes, 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 you do those. Because those can also help to purify the mind if it's done, if they're nishkamya, that's done without desire and with the love for God. But Bhagavan of his own accord didn't recommend any of these other practices. Why he didn't recommend other practices? Because he knew the most effective means to purify the mind is self-investigation and self-surrender. Self-investigation and self-surrender, they are more or less, well, ultimately they're one and the same practice, because we can't surrender ourselves completely without turning within to find out what we actually are. And even to turn within a little, we are to that extent surrendering, because in order to attend to ourselves, we have to let go of other things. We have to cease attending to other things. So there can be no self-investigation without self-surrender. We can, to some extent, surrender ourselves without self-investigation, but that's only a partial surrender. For the surrender to be complete, it must be, it can be achieved only by self-investigation. So this is what Bhagavan recommended of his own accord. Whenever anyone asked him, without asking particularly about other practices, he would always, in one way or other, be recommending self-investigation. Regarding not having sufficient desire to do this, we will have many desires. Desires for substances and desires for sex. Not everyone has desires for substances, but almost all of us have desire for sex. But desires don't, these desires don't always occupy our mind. Take for example the desire for sex. It's there in seed form in all of us. There's always the inclination to desire sex. But we don't spend it, our mind is not preoccupied with sex all day long. We have so many other preoccupations. So though sometimes our mind may be distracted by a strong desire for sex, this desire for sex isn't always distracting us. So we can make use of the time when our mind is not strongly under the sway of that vasana of liking for sex. When it's not strongly under the sway of that, we can make use of those times, of such times, to turn our mind within. So even if we've got a very, very strong desire for sex, we can find times when our mind isn't so distracted by that desire, but we can make use of those opportunities to turn within. In this context, there's a Sadhuam used to tell a nice story. It may have been a story he made up, or I don't know where he got the story from, but he applied it in a very nice way. There was a poor Arab merchant. He traveled with his camel from village to village, trading small things, and he eked out his livelihood in that way. So so much of the daytime he'd be wandering, he'd be riding his camel through the desert, or maybe he'd be walking the camel, and the camel would be carrying his whatever he's trading. So anyway, he and his camel, they used to travel in the desert. In the daytime, it would be very, very hot, but at nighttime it's cold. So at nighttime, he would always stop. He would put a peg in the ground, tie the camel to the peg, and he would put up his little tent, and he would get into his tent. One night, it was particularly cold outside. And so his camel, so in the, after he'd been awake for, after he'd been asleep for an hour or two, he woke up and he found the camel had put its nose in his tent. And he thought, yes, let it put its nose in the tent. Poor creature, it's been carrying all the heavy load during the daytime, and it's now very cold, so let it have its nose in the tent. So he, thinking that, he went to sleep again. When he woke up an hour or so later, he found the whole head of the camel was in the tent, and he thought, okay, let it be, poor creature. But slowly, as the night went on, more and more, the camel was getting more and more into the tent. First its nose, then its head, then its neck, then its feet. And by the morning, the merchant was outside and the camel had occupied the whole tent. Wise Sadhguru used to tell this story. He said, likewise, we should, just like the merchant allowed the camel's nose into the tent, but eventually the merchant was removed from the tent and the camel occupied the whole tent. We should at least do a little self-investigation. Introduce, just like the camel's nose enter the tent, we should let some self-attentiveness enter our life. Even if only little by little, occasionally during the day, we should try this, try little by little. If we try this little by little, just like the camel, once its nose was allowed in, then its head was in, then its neck was in. The more we allow, we make room in our life for self-investigation, however small the room may be, slowly, that will start taking possession of us. And eventually, that self-attentiveness will overtake our whole life, will be pushed out of the picture, and only pure self-awareness will remain.
That shows very well how the merchant is reluctant at first to allow the camel in, like we are resisting this path and so on. But in the end, the only difference is that maybe that night can turn into lifetimes here.
Of course.
We don't know yet, of course.
It's a slow process, but the more we attend, the more we attend to ourselves, the quicker the process will become. But it starts off slowly because our mind, our Vishaya vasanas, our inclination to go outwards, it's so strong. They're so strong. We can't overnight get rid of them. It's a long process. It may take many years or many lifetimes even. It depends. How long it's going to take us to reach our goal depends on how far we are from the goal. So the purer our mind, the quicker the journey will be, because we're closer to our goal. The more impure our mind, the longer the journey will be. But it doesn't matter whether it's long or short. What's important is that we progress in the right direction. So in order to progress in the right direction, we should allow allow the camel's nose into the tent. We should allow a little bit of self-attention here and there in our life. So however many other desires we may have, let's give a little room for this. Yes. And as I said, whatever strong desires we may have for other things, those desires are not always occupying our mind. So we can make use of the moments when our mind is not preoccupied with all its other desires to cultivate this desire. There's one beneficial desire, that is the desire to turn within.
Yes, and well, it's I understand, because these strong desires make the student feel that even though they're in this path and they're committed, they feel themselves to be like further back on the way, and even though we're not thinking about sex all the time, it's true. When a student lets themselves to be carried away by this desire, it's normal that they see it as a failure, and also in a way it's
but it's not a failure. But there's a saying that the road to success is paved with failures. When a small child is learning to walk, it can't just get up and start walking. It gets up, it toddles 1 or 2 steps, falls down. We have to fall many times before we can learn to walk. The same with learning to ride a bicycle. We have to fall off the bicycle so many times before we can master the art of balancing on it. Likewise in this path. So there is no failure in this path. The only failure is if we stop persevering. So long as we are persevering, we're on the right track.
And it doesn't matter where the mind goes, what the mind does with that, because I mean, if we see like a good, like a sign of progress, maybe the ego could say, okay, they take that like a good thing, and the ego might feel very well about that. And if not, it can turn it into a failure. So both sides are just part of the ego's expression, manipulation to.
Yeah. We shouldn't be discouraged. However many times we fail, the only way to succeed is to continue trying. And one other thing about this, the 2 types of desires were mentioned in the question. One is desire for substances, and the other is desire for sex. Desire for substances can mean alcohol or drugs or any of these things. These sort of desires are relatively easier to get rid of than the desire for sex, because not everyone has desire for substances of one kind or another. It's possible to overcome these desires. Whereas the desire for sex is something we can never overcome until we eradicate ego. Because the nature of ego, as Bhagavan said, is nothing but the false awareness, I am this body. So long as we identify ourselves as a body, that sexual desire will be there. It may sometimes be stronger, sometimes less strong, but the vasana, the inclination to have desire for sex, is deeply rooted in. I mean, it's the nature of ego, because the ego always identifies itself with a body, and as a body, the body is so-called, so to speak, programmed for sex. That's how the species is reproduced by sex. So that desire for sex is a very deep-rooted desire, and one that we all have to a greater or lesser extent. So we can never overcome that desire entirely. We can, but by following this path, we can slowly curb all our vasanas. That is, each time we refrain from going outside, by turning within, we are thereby not just weakening one vasana at a time. We are reducing the strength of the whole army of vasanas. So since the vasanas for sex are a part of that army, their strength is reduced along with the other ones. So we can slowly reduce it, but we should never imagine that there's going to be a time when we'll be completely free of. There may be times in our life when when that thought about sex is less dominant in our life than at other times, but the vasana is always there. Whether manifest currently or not, the vasana is there. So, and that vasana will remain so long as ego remains. So, yes. But if we want to overcome that vasana, that inclination, that desire for sex, we can. The most effective means to do so is by self-investigation and self-surrender. Though we won't overcome that desire completely until ego is destroyed, this is the only way to destroy ego, and therefore the only way to overcome this desire. And in the meanwhile, because we're curbing other vasanas, we'll also have a greater ability to curb this vasana. We'll get less carried away by it.
So the focus will be on using the time available for us when we are not thinking about, when that strong desire is not there, to carve that desire little by little. Yeah, and when that happens, when the strong desire comes and I'm carried away by that, not to torture myself about.
Yeah, exactly. And we also have to remember Bhagavan recommended a gentle approach to this self-investigation. There's a verse in Bhagavad Gita which begins Sane Sane. Sane Sane means slowly, slowly, gradually, gradually. Bhagavan translated that verse into Tamil, and he translated Sane Sane as Mella Mella. That means little by little, slowly, slowly. That is slowly, slowly. We have to turn our mind back towards ourselves. Bhagavan didn't recommend a forcible approach. He gave the analogy of tempting a runaway cow back to its shed with some nice green grass. He said other spiritual practices like yoga and so on is like taking a stick and running after a cow in order to try and chase it back into its shed. Such efforts, we'll get tired before the cow gets tired. We run after it this way, and it'll slip off another way. So that is not the way to bring the cow back to its shed. We need to slowly, slowly tempt the cow back into its shed with some nice green bunch of nice green grass. Likewise, we need to slowly, slowly cajole our mind to bring it back within. So a slow and steady approach is the most effective means.
Yeah, almost like a marathon runner. Like we cannot start from the marathon like running too fast.
No. Slowly, slowly.
We're going to lose our breath, and slowly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When a little child is learning to walk, it doesn't spend all day trying to walk. Sometimes it's sitting down happily playing with its toys. Then it wants to get up and it toggles a little, and then it falls down, and then it takes a rest and plays with its toys again. That's okay, because sooner or later that urge to walk will remain, and it'll continue trying again and again. So if we to some extent play with our toys, allow our mind to go out and do all its mischief, so long as we are slowly trying to cajole it back within, we don't have to be too worried about it. But of course, obviously, even when we're allowing our mind to go outwards, we should still be trying to curb our vasanas. That is, we should be trying to reduce the momentum, the velocity with which our mind goes outwards. And we should also try to curb our mind from more harmful things. If we've got an inclination to be greedy or to be arrogant or to be selfish or to be unkind, these sort of asubha vasanas, these are the first ones we need to curb. And then slowly we'll be able to curb, we can focus on the other less harmful vasanas. So we should always be trying to curb our vasanas, even when we're not turning back within. We should always be trying to keep a check on our vasanas.
And do you think it would be useful, for example, when we know that we're going to fall prey of a desire or something, like to pause at a moment, maybe a brief moment, to self-inquire for maybe some seconds, maybe a minute, and then fulfill the desire if we're not.
And also not. One of the questions is what are the recommendations? Another thing that can be very helpful is thinking about Bhagavan's teachings, because if we think about whatever desire may arise in us, even if we satisfy our desire, it's going to be a very momentary satisfaction. And then again, we'll be dissatisfied and we'll want more and more and more. So by thinking about the transitory nature of all that we experience in this life, thinking about what actually is real, whatever we experience in life, so many types of experiences we have, including experiences maybe of substances or sex or whatever, all these things, they're all fleeting experiences. None of them last. You may be able to take some drug and have a high, but how long is that going to last? Then you come down, you'll feel depressed again. So these are all very fleeting. So by thinking about the transitory nature of all these things, the insubstantial nature of all these things, and ultimately what alone remains, whether we're enjoying sex or having some drug-induced high or intoxicated with alcohol or whatever, but one thing that always remains, we are always aware of ourselves as I am. In waking, we're aware of ourselves as I am. In dream, we're aware of ourselves as I am. In sleep, we're aware of ourselves as I am. So the one thing that is constant, the one thing that is ever unchanging is that fundamental awareness I am. So that alone is real. So by thinking like this, even when we're not turning our mind within, when we're allowing our mind to go outwards, it's good to be dwelling on Bhagavan's teaching, because that will be encouraging us to try again and again to turn within. And when we think deeply about Bhagavan's teachings, thinking deeply about his teachings is called Manana. But we can't really do Manana without at least doing a little bit of Nididhyasana along with it. Because when we're thinking, what is real in all these things is only this awareness I am, automatically there our attention's gone a little bit towards I am. So Bhagavan's teachings, letting our mind dwell more and more on Bhagavan's teachings can be very, very beneficial. It's a great aid to putting his teachings into practice.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's a good point. Using Manana like it's like a little turn inwards.
Yeah. Manana is a good opportunity to frequently try to put it into practice, because it's constantly reminding us. And what's a Manana about? Ultimately, what is the core of Bhagavan's teachings? I am. So by thinking more and more about Bhagavan's teaching, we're bringing our mind more and more back towards ourself, towards the awareness I am.